Thank you, Councillor Cole. And thank you, Rhiannon, for having me. This is a real honor. The last time I gave any sort of significant length of speech, it was grade 6, and I was talking about Anne of Green Gables. So if I get a little stuck, maybe I'll give you some Ella Montgomery stats. I was asked last year to deliver a thank you to Music Canada President Graham Henderson here at the Economic Club, following his speech about the broken promise of a golden age. Graham's speech addressed the social contract made in the late 90s that reflected a repeated prediction. In a digital world with rules that help fuel technology companies' growth, creators would be better off and playing fields would be leveled. Instead of a new golden age, artists have experienced a sharp erosion of their rights, along with their ability to earn a living from their creative works and participate in a viable marketplace. Now, being much more comfortable singing and playing fiddle behind a microphone, I asked what I should say in my thank you speech, and I was encouraged to just be honest about how my life and the lives of my friends look these days. And so I did just that. I was quite unprepared for the reaction. A lot of people were fairly surprised at the current state of the music industry and what the realities are for a musician who's not a household name, but not a beginner, someone with 17 years of professional performing experience, a career that's included a lot of recognizable works and collaborations, and still has trouble making a living. So here are the Coles notes about myself. I know we got actual Coles notes earlier, but I started playing violin at age 4. I studied opera performance at Western and then McGill. Currently, I'm most excited about my duo with Andrew Penner, called Harrow Fair, and the boutique record label that I run, which is called Roaring Girl Records. For 7 years, I was a member of Great Lakes Swimmers, and I've played with Jim Cuddy, Stephen Page, Calexico, Alan Doyle, Dan Mangan, Joel Plaskett, Justin Rutledge, and played and sung on hundreds of songs by many different artists, including Cowboy Junkies, Donovan Woods, and Rose Cousins, as well as my own records. I do a lot of studio work for film and television. For example, I performed all the fiddle for the CBC hit TV show Republic of Doyle, and recently the film Maudie, about the Nova Scotia folk artist Maud Lewis. Someone liked it. I started and am the artistic director of a new festival in the Muskoka town of Gravenhurst that we're launching in this August long weekend with 3 days of programming, including our headliner, Jim Cuddy. I'm a member of Soul Pepper Theatre Company, and I'll be performing in New York City this July at the beautiful Signature Theatre on 42nd Street. I am a member of the Board of Governors of Massey Roy Thompson Hall, and I'm on the board of the Canadian Independent Music Association. I'm sorry about the laundry list, but I'd like to get my point across, which is that even though I do all of these things, I have a serious problem. And my problem is that because of this broken promise of a golden age, I'm barely able to make a living. You know, when artists bring their concerns to policymakers, the response that we're given, and I've heard it personally many times, is that creators are asking for the clock to be turned back and that they're not going to do that. But that is not what we want. However, we do need to take a look back at the policies and the promises that were made in the late 90s and recognize that times have changed. If anything, I think we'd like to turn the clock forward and rethink some of these ideas and assumptions that have turned out to be false, and these predictions that have sadly not come to pass. At Minister Jolie's Economic Club of Canada speech last June, I was able to have a conversation with her, and her message was that artists need to speak up, and that she needs creators on her side. Okay, so out of this came Focus on Creators, a coalition of Canadian musicians, authors, songwriters, and other members of the creative class, which was created to bring focus to the artist's perspective in light of some major federal cultural policy activities. At this year's Junos Award, I went to this in Ottawa. I had the opportunity to speak to Minister Jolie again. And again, she said that artists need to speak up. It's a little uncomfortable. I'll admit, because the outside perception of success is so often wrapped up in financial security, and I'm here admitting to you all that it's looking pretty grim in that regard on a day-to-day basis, let alone saving for the future. And it's also scary, and I told the minister this, to be openly critical of the hand that feeds you, even if they're only feeding you morsels. But she only reiterated that we need to speak up. So here I am, I'm speaking up. Every time the subject of the digital revolution comes up, the main solution that creators are offered to is adapt. There are some adaptations that we have power over and some we don't. Artists were told that part of our income should be from CDs sold off the stage. Well, I run a record label, and yet I couldn't even buy a MacBook with a built-in disk drive. And the only place that I can play a CD is in my old Corolla. So we have to adapt to the new ways of accessing music and advertising our art. We were promised that the digital age would level the playing field by eliminating the middleman. As an indie musician, I upload my tour dates on my website, Facebook, Bands in Town, Twitter, Instagram, and Factor. I report and update my neighboring right claims to ACTRA, and I manage my creative catalog with Resound. I report my shows and set lists on SoCan. I pay to report my sales on @venue. I use SoundCloud for private streams for media, YouTube to upload my content before someone else does, and I pay a percentage of my income to my distributor to get my music online and in stores. Far from disappearing, the middleman has multiplied. Worse yet, for the artist, this is an overwhelming amount of activity and does not leave much time to do the actual creating. In 2014, a senior manager at Google Canada provided his opinion on this to Parliament's Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. The challenge is that the skills that are required to succeed have radically changed. Some are doing a better job at adapting than others because it's just a completely different environment that they're operating in. Thank you for that update on my challenges in this landscape that you created and you perpetuate. So this leads me to this. This is a word that's very important to me. Accountability. Let's look at the current situation and who is accountable for the devaluation to which we're forced to adapt. We now have 13 competing paid subscription streaming platforms in Canada. Among them Spotify, Apple Music, and Google Play, and over 400 legal digital services worldwide. So picture each shiny new streaming platform as a shop window, and our content at fire sale prices fills their shop window, giving them credibility, while we, the creators of this content, are asked to do the advertising. They give us lists of best practices to get more of our hard-won fans to use their services. If we're not getting on playlists, it's our fault for not engaging with our fans enough. But in reality, it's becoming increasingly difficult for independent artists to land songs on their curated playlists in what's emerging as a 21st century version of payola. The formula is much the same on the ad-based services, except they price our work even lower. Let's look at the biggest music service in the world. You know what that is? YouTube. Did you know that 82% of YouTube users use it for music? It's supported by advertising, and it's based on user-uploaded content. But wait, running a commercial site based on unauthorized uploading of copyrighted music is illegal, right? Okay, so YouTube says, well, it's not our fault. We're just the shop window. We didn't put the items in the window, so we're not accountable for them. We're a passive intermediary. We're not liable for this massive copyright infringement. But, once again, wait, because a top brass at Google just bragged that 80% of all watch time is recommended by YouTube. He explained that everybody thinks all the music that's being listened to and watched is by search. But it isn't. In his words, that's a really important and powerful thing. So this means that YouTube actively directs consumers. This doesn't seem all that passive to me. Zero accountability. And when asked about the problem of low payments to artists, a Google executive said, "It's important to note that on the concerns that have been flagged, there's no consensus, even amongst the artistic community, about the impacts of streaming and what they actually think about it or what they don't think about it." He said, "Every single time I hear a newspaper article about the reduction in royalty rates that they're getting from streaming, I'll see another artist who basically says, well, actually, my royalty rates are pretty good." Well, here's the consensus. Your rates are the lowest in the world. Your revenue is built on the backs of other people's talent and work, and you refuse to acknowledge it. Accountability means acknowledging value and compensating for it. So here's another solution musicians are presented with: touring. Is touring the answer? There are a lot of positives about touring, and you learn to find the bits that you enjoy, and you make the most of them. But it's work. Since the devaluation of music that's occurred in this new era of free, fans are more unwilling to pay for live music, and the market is saturated with bands trying to eke out a living on the road. Touring's also difficult for many artists. The framework doesn't exist to support some genres like hip-hop, and it's unkind to people with families and to women. Lorena McKennett, who's an artist entrepreneur hero of mine, said that for artists like herself, touring was always a loss leader in order to promote her recordings. Now that has become entirely unsustainable. She also points out that we should not be misled by equating fame with business viability, as there's many famous people through the new technologies who are still unable to make a living. When I was putting together the lineup for my festival, I texted a multi-Juno nominated and winning musician friend to see if he was available. He texted back that no, he'd been full for a long time for that weekend. 5 minutes later, I got a text back saying, "Oh, you mean as a musician? I thought you wanted to rent my Airbnb." True story. He is so tired of taking his band on the road and losing money, or barely scraping by with the help of grants and government funding. This is not a business model, and it's a far cry from a fair marketplace for our work. As much as I would rather be writing and playing music than anything else, that laundry list of things I do, the truth is that I haven't much to show for it besides a discography and a stack of lanyards. For a long time, I thought I just wasn't good enough, until I started being honest with other artist friends who I'd imagined were in better financial situations than I was. But it turned out this is across the board. So I've put some thought to the situation and the problem behind it, and how to get it right. We all have a role to play as artists, as consumers, as industry, and as government. So let's start with the artists. Be as honest as you feel comfortable about your life and your lifestyle. And this will help us all be more honest. And I'm guilty of this too. There's a temptation to post these glossy photos of tour on Instagram and Facebook, but then maybe post some of the less glamorous stuff too. Create and protect your intellectual property. Speak up for your contributions to projects, make your own pieces of art, and do the paperwork to safeguard it. Support robust copyright laws. They're there to protect you. There's this misconception that this is only for the big fish, but it is for everyone. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have asked at any time during the last 10 years, is it really that bad? Then congratulations, you're part of the 1%. But here's how you can pay back into the ecosystem that's disappeared since you got your break. Perhaps you're in a position to bring an opener along on your concerts, your evenings with, or champion a young talent that you're really excited about. How to help as a consumer. There are a number of best practices that every streaming service gives to artists and labels. These are ways that they want artists to reach out to their fan base that they have built to plug into their system. Okay, fair enough. So let's make this easier for your favorite artists. Here are some free ways to help. Be a tastemaker. Create playlists on your favorite streaming services for your events, road trips, friends' birthdays. Add your favorite artists. This is free. Write reviews and rate on iTunes, Amazon, etc. Getting reviews and ratings helps shift algorithms in favor of artists. It helps their work come up as things you might like, and it can give your favorite artists an edge in the very competitive granting and funding races. So here are some pretty cheap ways to help. If you think you're going to buy a record, or you've been tempted by a great track in advance of its release, buy the record on release day. This can accelerate an album onto the front page of whatever service you use to buy music, which is an excellent advertisement. Buy merchandise. Show off your band love with a sweet t-shirt, a poster, tickets. Go to live shows. If you love an album or a book, buy it and buy one and give it to a friend. This will also help your personal life. Subscribe to a music service. For the price of one album a month, you not only get millions of songs at your fingertips with no ads, but you're also making a difference. The revenue gap between ad-based services and their subscriber versions is significant. I have numbers on that, but I don't want you to cry in your coffee. As industry members, here's some things to do. Now, I wish this was a given, but this has been bothering me for the last 17 years. Respect the time that it has taken for your artists to get to the point where you can help with your skills. Remember that this is an ecosystem, and we need symbiosis. I recently heard an industry member say, without irony, when we were discussing funding for creators, well, where would artists be without the industry? Well, where would the industry be without the artists? Creators are the song, and industry is the amplifier. It's a delicate balance, and we all need each other. Respect artists through clear and consistent language about compensation. In a profession where musicians are so often called upon to donate our talent for exposure and for publicity, and where our union has little clout anymore in negotiating fees for the vast majority of us, be upfront about payment. Be realistic about expectations and consider carefully what you're asking of them. I just got my updated pension statement. I'm going to make $32 a month. Be an incubator. If you can offer building opportunities for younger artists or incentives for more established artists to support the ecosystem, do it. It will benefit everyone. I congratulate Massey Roy Thompson Hall on their excellent Live at Massey Hall program, which helps to grow the careers of promising artists towards the goal of performing at the Grand Dame herself. They promote shows in venues of increasing size, using their credibility, their loyalty, and their taste-making status to give these artists a platform and a chance to build an audience. Sound familiar? This is the inverse of how streaming sites work. If you're in the industry, pay for your tickets. It's common practice for label folk, managers, our agents, lawyers to ask to be on the list for their artist shows. Okay, but these same artists pay you for your services. Why on earth do you expect to get their work for free? If you have a company and you're in a position to redesign things, or say if you're perhaps a record company building a new premises, take bold steps. Make a company for 10 years, 20 years from now, not for right now. Patagonia, the outdoor wear company, opened a daycare at their offices. It recovers 91% of calculable costs annually, and the benefits, financial and otherwise, pay for themselves. Tax benefits, employee retention, engagement, more women in management, greater employee loyalty. So imagine a record company that housed a daycare not only for its employees, but also for visiting artists on PR junkets or musicians in town recording albums. Wouldn't that be a draw, not only nationally but internationally? Imagine if more effort was made to help all women in all genres of the arts, not to make that choice between being an artist and a parent, or being torn between those choices. If you want the executives of tomorrow, affordable childcare should be a mandate for every company and for every employee. So here's what the government can do. End tech company safe harbors. The social contract that internet service providers put forward back in the 1990s, I had a scrunchie then, was that they would provide connectivity to the world in exchange for immunity from liability when they were acting as a mere intermediary Remember that? A store window, or a mere search engine. The bargain was struck, and the laws were drafted to create safe harbors for these early-day internet companies. But over the past 20 years, that's a whole kid grown to adulthood, business models have changed. Online services like YouTube actively direct consumers to music on their site that they think consumers want to hear. They are effectively selling our music. They're just not paying creators appropriately for it because they're pretending this isn't their business model. Now, the European Commission has acknowledged that the market isn't functioning properly and has identified and accepted the problem as an unintended value gap, and they've agreed that legal clarification is needed. Can we follow suit? End other industry cross-subsidies. The radio royalty exemption is an industry cross-subsidy given to every commercial radio station in Canada, exempting them from paying royalties to artists and record labels on their first $1.25 million in advertising revenue. The exemption was introduced as a political compromise during 1997 amendments to the Copyright Act, but it is now outdated and unjustified. It's really not right that artists and labels continue to subsidize these very, very large media companies. So let's look at TV and film royalties. Because composers, songwriters, and publishers receive public performance royalties when their musical works are used in TV and film soundtracks, one would think that the performers and record labels would be afforded the same right to compensation. Not in Canada. The definition of sound recording in the Copyright Act is worded in such a way that recorded music is not considered a sound recording when it's in a TV show or movie. So this means no royalties for performers like me. For example, even though I played on almost every episode of CBC Republic of Doyle, including many improvised sections that I composed myself, which is now syndicated worldwide, I only received the one-time union rate I got per session, and each session usually covered many episodes, which was $280. The composer collects residuals every time that show airs. I think every hotel room I've ever been on, Republic of Doyle is airing somewhere. 44 countries around the world, the UK, France, and Australia among them, afford performers and record labels the right to receive public performance royalties when their sound recordings are used as part of a soundtrack in TV and film. And this contributes to the fact that there are very few ways that my work makes me money unless I'm there performing it in real time. And although it feels as though I try, I just can't be everywhere. So it's undeniable that the landscape has changed significantly, but artists are still creating, and we're asking for some accountability from the government. We're asking for some redefining of who it is they're protecting and fostering, and for the amendment of policies that date back to the late 1990s, policies that are now out of date. So if we need to adapt, if we're told to adapt, then we need the policies to adapt, the policies that affect us. Now, I know my parents worry about me and my future. We're very different people. They're very brainy, introverted academics, and they've been incredibly supportive over the years. It's been a learning curve for both of us. But I think from a practical point of view, for the amount of hours that I've spent learning to play my instrument since age 4, I won't give away my age, but it's quite some time, they might wish that I had instead spent the same amount of time becoming a doctor and actually a specialist, judging by the amount of time I have spent learning my instrument. But they do understand what the value of a musical education goes far beyond my credit score or whether I'll ever be able to afford a house. Music gave us a mutual language where there might not have been one. It gave us a common ground. Music's been my passport all over the world and has introduced me to so many incredible people and places. You know, I've been able to sit in with Howlin' Mad Perry and his blues band at Ground Zero in Mississippi, and I led a session through a set of Cape Breton fiddle tunes at the Cobblestone Pub in Dublin. And I joined a country band on my very first day of moving to Los Angeles, which gave me a community immediately and made the move a soft landing. I'm so proud of my label and of its focus on collaboration, something that I feel is more necessary than ever. I'm thrilled about my music festival this summer and the support of the artists, the community, and the sponsors who saw value in my idea. I'm sure my parents would sleep easier if I had a more stable job that they could get their mind around, that has a more defined rate of return like doctors get. But, I recently read an article in The New Yorker about how artificial intelligence is providing more accurate diagnoses than doctors. So in my opinion, the last thing that AI will be able to replicate, if it ever can, is the limitless scope of the human imagination. So perhaps, if we apply some of these solutions that I and many others are proposing, being a creator will become the more stable job in the long run. There's no reason that that cannot, nor should not, be so. Thank you.
I'd like to now turn the session over to our moderated Q&A. So this is a time for our audience to also ask questions of Miranda. So if I may, I'd like to invite Kate Taylor, award-winning journalist and currently the film critic and arts columnist for the Globe and Mail, to the stage. Let's join me in welcoming her to the podium.
So thank you, Miranda. That was inspiring, and I think it was very brave, because clearly the time's come to start speaking some home truths about the way digitization has impoverished artists in many instances. And I kind of wanted to start by, I know it's the Economic Club of Canada, but nonetheless asking you to be even more personal about this. And this sort of journey started for you last year when you stood up to thank Graham at a similar event and chose to use that occasion to kind of start on this theme. And I wondered what kind of reaction you got at the time after you'd sort of come forward that time.
Well, Anne of Green Gables was written... to be honest, I wasn't really prepared for the reaction personally. It was only a 5-minute thank you, but I was very blunt about my situation. And it was amazing to see other people in my community reach out and say, me too, because that's something that, especially with social media and this real push to make your life look as glossy as possible. I mean, this isn't just an artist thing, this is everybody, if you flip through anybody's Facebook, And so it was sort of a really lovely reach out from a lot of people in my community saying, I understand. I'm in the same boat, and
I wonder if you got any pushback at all, because one thing that I think you were talking about, and I hear a lot out there, is that sense, we do have that myth, kind of the starving artist, that, artists don't need to make money. This is their passion. This is kind of poverty is somehow natural to them. But you also,
I can make $5 go a long way.
But the flip side to that is that we live in a society in which money is equated with success. And you hear all the time from the consumer that kind of, if it's any good, it'll succeed. And I wonder how you respond to that, because obviously the courage you've shown, the reason I think it's so courageous is because part of what you have to stand up and say is, this isn't succeeding, and that's not fair.
Mm-hmm. I think the speech, the thank you to Graham, resulted in me having to take a little bit of an inward look, because it is a bit devastating to think 17 years of my life, and I rent this apartment in Parkdale, and I have a 1998 Corolla, which is a great car. It is.
But you might like to replace it one of these days.
Exactly. But I think the redefinition of success, like figuring out the things I'm proud of, and my contribution to the community, that had to come for sure, because I mean, I've been at an industry thing before and spoken with a label, someone at a label who was in sort of the financial sector, and the streaming is doing well for some people. There is this sort of mainstream group that it does work for, but my music is pretty niche. And so I was explaining, my Spotify numbers and what that actually translates in terms of how many cups of coffee, which is not many. And he said, well, I've never heard of you. So, I still deal with that. And, but I have, in order to kind of keep creating, you have to sort of go inward, I guess, and figure out what it is that is driving you and making you successful in the ways that you feel you are. It is, obviously, they're sort of in opposition, but it's not easy.
So if I can turn sort of then that personal journey into kind of the more political, the digital economy has created this situation where you have the distributors in the middle making good money, offering a plethora of cheap content to the consumer. So the distributors are happy, the consumer often seems to be happy, but at the very front end of the system, the creators and producers are not being compensated adequately. And so how do we kind of break up that unholy alliance? How do we get into that very popular relationship between the consumer and the distributor and somehow make room for the creator and producer?
I don't know if everybody's doing well. Obviously, there are some sort of there's a lot of middlemen, I guess, who have come in and are taking money. I think obviously trying to be as direct as possible, but I believe in labels too. I'm not saying that you only buy music from my website and that's it, because there are organizations that are built because they care and because they can do the work that I don't want to do. They can do the amplifying, and so that money, I think, is going in the right direction.
Yep.
The things that I have a lot of problems with, obviously, accountability, the fact that there's a lot of these new platforms that we have to learn and relearn, and then another one comes along, another shiny one comes along, we have to relearn that one. I mean, it's just so much time and effort for very little return of investment that's happening. And they're basing their sales on our credibility. I mean, that's the difficulty. I think when you look at some of these hyper-capitalist streams that are happening, I mean, look at Netflix, look at Uber. Netflix built its subscriber credibility on millions of people's work, and people are now subscribing to Netflix as a thing. And if you look now, it's all Netflix series at the top that they're creating themselves. So they're not paying for a lot more new content that's coming in. Uber, which has sort of given the millennials something to do, is now going for driverless cars. They're testing driverless cars. So they're going to take away this whole raft of people that they've given an opportunity to. So that's really worrying.
So do you think there are lessons in that? I mean, we always used to look at the music industry, looking at the cultural industries. The music industry was the canary in the coal mine, and to some extent, publishing and film, took note and said, "Don't let that happen to us." And sometimes they've been successful in stopping it, sometimes they haven't. So I wonder if that starts spreading beyond the media industries to, driving a car, local transportation, does that offer an opportunity for the cultural industries to say, hey, this is a wide social problem? Or is it simply a warning to others not to fall into the same trap?
I think it's a global problem on so many levels. If we dissect it just a second, we've created a culture of the amateur, which I'm sure you experience with citizen journalism, and which we're experiencing with the President of the United States. When this digital platform came, I mean, I remember being told that you can make an album in your bedroom, but I don't want to make an album in my bedroom because I don't know how to get the best sounds out of my voice, what microphone to use. I want to go to an expert who can do that. And I feel as though there's this sort of pervasive thing that's happened where we've become really scared of experts, and we've become really scared of education and knowledge. And the idea that anyone can make an album in their bedroom is democratizing, but in theory, but when you unpack it and you get further down the line, it just means that there's just so much more content out there for people to sift through. I mean, I've had so many reviews. My band Harrow Fair, we put out a record in November, and there were a lot of reviews that came back almost, I mean, apart from some of the major publications where they actually still employed journalists, so many of these reviews were just the press release coming back. And, what's the value in that? Mm-hmm. And this is what I'm sort of more worried about. And I don't know if that answered your question.
Is that kind of move to amateurism? And yet I kind of wonder if talking about that and talking about the distinction between amateurism and professionalism and what it is a professional artist brings to things, if that's one way to sort of talk to the public and talk to the consumer about that value that you bring in force, because I guess I feel that when you use your YouTube example, that it's about bringing the consumer around to seeing that what YouTube is doing is unfair, and that ultimately quality will suffer.
Oh, and it has. I mean, anybody who's fallen down the YouTube rabbit hole can attest to the fact that quality has suffered quite a lot. I mean, you can watch crazy things that should not be available.
I also kind of wonder if it's a specifically or a particular Canadian problem. I mean, we have this kind of culture of this bestseller culture. This Harry Potter, the person who has 1 billion streams on Spotify, mm-hmm. And then everything else kind of drops off the bottom. And traditionally, the Canadian market's smaller market. It's in the middle. It's not the big best-selling stuff. So I wonder if you see the problem as being more acute in Canada.
I don't know if it's specifically a Canadian problem. We do have some problems in Canada that are specific to Canada. Obviously, the tall poppy comes up a lot, where we're very happy to celebrate artists after they've gone somewhere else and they become famous and someone else has said they're great, and then we say, oh, they're ours, we're so proud of them. And this, obviously, that's something. And it's something that I think we should be more, rather than just sort of use as a meme and a trope, it's something that we can keep an eye on with regards to someone like Drake. I mean, Drake comes up in every chat about the music industry in Canada. Everyone says, well, Drake's doing so well, which is awesome. I mean, that's so great.
But there's one Drake.
There's one Drake. But, and all power to him. But then we should look at where the upcoming hip-hop artists are. And why aren't they being supported in this manner? If there's obviously some sort of an appetite for this. I was talking to my friend Tona about this, who's a hip-hop artist and an incredible producer. Why aren't we actually spending a little more time than planting poppy seeds rather than just celebrating our one shining basketball fan?
But there are supports in Canada. I mean, I would say that was perhaps one of the advantages of working in Canada, is that there are more artist supports than, from a point of view of government support.
Like funding. Yeah. Well, we're very lucky. Canada, obviously, we're very lucky to have so many wonderful funding bodies. And I have applied for many of them, and I've been on the jury for one, which was a real life changer. It was the Toronto Arts Council, and getting that massive amount of talent and not submitted, and sifting through it with a bunch of different people from very different genres, and sifting through it and finding common ways and new vernacular to speak about quality of music. It is possible to sift out quality despite genre. Mm-hmm. But I find that more and more as the government, and hooray, gives money for these government funding bodies, some of them are draconian and some of them are completely complex. I mean, I think if you are a funding body and you are finding out that most of the people who are applying for your grant are grant writers, then you have a problem.
Yeah. Well, and of course, that's something the Canada Council is trying to address by sort of streamlining and simplifying the system so that it's not...
Bravo to the Ontario Arts Council for finally getting online. Yeah. Up until this last year, you had to print out 6 copies of your 44-page or whatever application. So that's a big deal.
Another issue I wanted to talk to you about, your label is Roaring Girl Records, and I guess you're a roaring girl. And so I wanted to ask you a bit about the controversy we've just been through with the hashtag Juno's So Male, and whether you feel the criticisms of the industry are legitimate, that there was a male dominance, obviously, in the nominees, but also in the suits, too. The suits usually turn out to be men.
Without a doubt. This is something that I have faced since day one. There's just no excuse anymore to have a panel that isn't representative of the future that we want. So, no more manels. I mean, I think it's absolutely shocking that that still exists and is considered okay. Everyone needs a role model, and as we go through generations, it takes generations to make change, but we need role models in order to do that. And so, one of the things that we get sort of put back is, well, there aren't that many women in executives, so we can't have them. Well, you know what? Do you want more women? Then make that example. Give us more role models, and we will follow. That's definitely something. I mean, I've experienced sexism in the industry. It frightens me how much I let it brush off my back because it happens so much. I mean, but just to things like I was accused of costing too much to take on the road because I need my own hotel room in a male band. And I thought, well, I'm actually also helping out the wives of my bandmates, because I don't think they're very comfortable about all of us, shacking up on the road. But, when that was leveled at me, I don't even think that it occurred to him that was actually
what the problem with that was.
Latent sexism. Yeah.
Yeah. And any particular solutions you think we could pursue?
Well, I just think that if you're in any position to create a panel, to start a discussion, make it indicative of the future we want. And this goes for music festivals as well. I mean, I've just published the final list of for my music festival and my lineup, and it was a real concern. I mean, my first dream list, and I thought I was really aware of this, but my first dream list of artists, I think, had one woman in my first lineup of 7, and then I had to catch myself, and then I thought, well, there's so many amazing women. And then, of course, we went for trying to get as gender balanced as possible, because why not? I mean, we've got our prime minister saying, it's 2000, well, now it's 17.
Certainly the talent is there amongst the artists. There's discussion, I guess, whether there's a pipeline problem, especially, I guess, in the technical fields. Like if you look at the sound engineer nominations, those kind of things, always this male-dominated field.
Right. I think that also speaks to the role model question, and the more we can shine lights on women who are doing incredible jobs, because there are a lot of them, then I think that the more role models we put up there will be more followers and people who are. But there was a comment made after that whole shenanigans about the Junos. There was a comment made that, well, maybe about women, I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to get the quote exactly wrong, but women spending time in a dark room, and why would they want to do that?
Oh, yeah, they wouldn't want to spend time in a dark room, yeah. The suggestion the job wasn't worth having, really, which I thought was very, very phony.
I'm not even sure what the suggestion was. Yeah. Because as a recording artist, we spend a lot of time in dark rooms recording. Yes. So what was the difference with whether we're in front of the microphone or behind it? I think we need to be really careful about what we say. And especially when we're addressing a crisis, we need to be very careful to include women in your answer.
Well, thank you, Miranda. The Roaring Girl, I think we have some questions, time for some questions from the audience, if we have microphones out there. I think there's, yeah.
Hi. You referenced artists' unions a couple of times in your speech. I wonder if you see if there's still a role for them. Or is there a role for them?
If there is a role for them, it does need to evolve quite a lot. I've had a lot of discussions with Michael Murray at the Toronto Union. I also was a member of the union for many, many years, I think since I was 21. And I've let my You can read my blacklist in the back of the page. It's really the only thing that everybody even reads the AFM magazine for, just to see who got blacklisted. But I've let it slide because it just does not apply to me at this point. There are several big issues for musicians and the union. Obviously, one, the union was created and was at its peak when there was, a CBC orchestra, when things were really contracted. And, like I said, my pension is $32 because just none of these contracts I work apply to this. And so that's one, obviously pay and pay scale. There's just such a huge competitive market that the union has sort of been forgotten in terms of scale, unless you're in a certain part of the industry, like an orchestra. It does work for orchestras, and that's great. Getting across the border, this is another reason that we were all told to be members of the union, is because they had an ability to help and facilitate our work in the States. Getting a visa to work in the United States is extremely hard. It takes extremely long time, and it's very expensive. So this is one of the ways that we were sort of told that we could make this easier. If they wanted to work at that, and kind of, it's, the process has even gotten even more crazy since I've let my dues slide. But if they wanted to work on that, but I don't think they do, because they get a certain percentage of the processing fee. So they don't have any incentive to change that. So if they did want to actually get down to nuts and bolts and chat about these things, unlike the film and television industries, unlike ACTRA, for example, there just isn't the money coming in to get the benefits that perhaps we would really love, which is some healthcare and maybe dental and certain things that you can access on that side. We just don't have the same kind of money that's coming in. I'm not sure how that could be supported, but I think the conversation should keep going.
Other questions out there?
Just a comment. I'm Leona White, the executive director of the CFM. There are some things I think that we should talk about later, because we definitely don't get a cut of the USCIS fee. That's one. But anyway, just listening to you, I would really like to have the opportunity to speak with you further. I was going to actually go to the side with you, but considering this is on the floor,
Yeah.
I'm now addressing it here.
Can you clarify for me? Because
Sure.
Michael Murray had told me about there is a fee that we pay, which is part of the visa processing fee. So
Yeah.
I just paid it to get my O1 visa, which ended up costing about $5,000 US.
Yep.
And there is a fee that we paid to the AFM to get that.
Yes, there is a consulting fee, and that replaces, well, it's not a consulting fee, it's a mandatory peer consultation that is required by USCIS. Ours is actually the lowest processing fee in the United States through the other peer organizations. You pay it to the AFM because you're a musical artist. And it actually replaces what is the labor market assessment that is in the United States. So any other profession, you're paying thousands of dollars for a labor market assessment on top of the visa, which is not a fact that is very well known. So.
Thank you.
But it's not a cut of the
Okay.
USCIS.
Oh, sorry. Then I redefined my comment.
Okay.
There
and
is a fee.
We do have lobbied tirelessly for improvements as well, but again, that should be a side discussion. Okay.
Let's chat.
Yes, please. I welcome it.
Thank you. Are there other questions? There's some questions
there.
over here. If we've
Celebrity question.
Sorry, here.
I'm Kayla from Small World Music. I just want, it's less of a question, more of a thank you for bringing up childcare with regards to the music industry. Myself, I work in live concert presentation. I'm a sole parent, and it's a night economy. If you want to lift up women and provide space and inclusion, childcare has to be part of it. It's often seen as an expensive budget line that can be cut if you hire a man instead. And I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely.
Hi. Well, initially, as an artist, I wanted to say thank you because I think to comment on the disparity between how you present yourself as successful between that and how people, how you actually are. So that perception is a very hard thing to gauge in the industry because as an artist, you often feel that you rely on people thinking you have lots of money because people want to listen to someone with lots of money between actually having that. And also having to gauge, as you know, an artist with a band, what I can do to help them be compensated, because if my band isn't compensated, if the other people that work for me aren't compensated, then it not only makes my job a lot harder, but it makes the entire ecosystem fall apart. So I'd like to thank you for commenting on that, because it's really important. Yeah. My question, though, or at least my inquiry is, the biggest thing I've found, and as an artist that whose listening base is predominantly female and young girls, and having friends in the industry as well that are female, I've found it to be something that I, as an ally, want to help with. And I just, for a young girl, or especially a young female artist, what is your kind of words of advice to start kind of navigating the music industry?
Advice for you to help?
Yeah, and just to relay. I mean, yeah, I guess just your advice.
I think persevering and speaking out. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've arrived at a gig and they ask me which boy in the band I'm dating.
Yeah.
And also, or I'm setting up my gear and they don't listen to, like, I'm talking about sound engineers, or I'm not listened to as to what I need, and they actually ask men in my band what my requirements are technically. If you spot this.
Well, yeah, I have a friend that's in a band, and she was just telling me, they go to sound check, and like the people that are supposed to be helping them because they can't afford to have their own sound guy, are much more distracted by the fact that they're a female band, or are much more willing to take advantage of them in terms of pay because they're not men, and that just really broke my heart as an artist that reaps the benefits from being male. It's just something that I wish I could help with, or at least have some kind of
I think just keeping your eyes open and definitely calling it out when you see it. And thank you for being a feminist.
Thank you. Cheers.
I just want to quickly address your first question, though, because it's really important to me. I spent 7 years in a band, and I spent my career being a side person a lot of times. And this is a thing about being a musician, is that you're hired because of what you do and what you bring to something. But a great part of it is your creative collaboration, or, so for example, in a band, I would bring an idea to the table, or I would bring a line, a riff, or some sort of fiddle thing, or a vocal thing, and a lot of times that doesn't get rewarded in the back end. So for being in a band for 7 years, I have no other than neighboring rights, which are pennies on my statements. I don't get any money for anything that I worked on for a lot of those things. And I take some onus in that because I didn't stand up for myself when I could have said, you know what, I helped you write that. It is a very gray area, though. But I think if you can be an amazing employer off the top, and you can respect your bandmates for what they're bringing to your music, and you pay them appropriately, then that's fantastic. And keep that up and tell people about it.
Sure. And make sure they get fed well too is also very important. Thank you very much.
I have one here.
Hi, we spoke earlier. My name's Lisa, and you're clearly a multitasker, right? You do many things. You have these multiple skills and abilities. My question, and actually an invitation for a comment, is about the bottom line, about finances, about the perception, the systemic perception that artists, we love our work. I'm a creator, I'm a composer, producer, performer. As you, sometimes we develop other skills in order to pay the rent, in order to meet the bottom line. There's some systemic perception that we love it so much that we're willing to do anything at any time without compensation, without fair remuneration. Just this week, I had to again address in emails that uncomfortable conversation with clients who come to my studio to say, just because it's an arts-based operation, It doesn't mean that I don't have policies on payment. So a little bit roundabout, my question would be, do you have any advice, any quick little zingers, or like strongly worded, very neutral, professional ways that you deal with situations when your talents and skills you have to be, well, you've been so honest and forthright, I'm just going to use the word beg. Why am I begging for the proper remuneration that I am owed? And because anybody else that provides a one-off service, you go to a restaurant, a massage therapist, a dentist, you cannot leave without paying the bill.
Well, you just answered your question, because, and this is, I find, the best tool is just turning the mirror around. So if someone doesn't pay you, or they have you say, well, did you go to that restaurant? Did you pay for that meal? Did you, and it's very quickly, reasonable people will feel embarrassed and they'll send you their e-transfer.
But it's unfortunate, right, that it even has to be said that way.
Of course.
And I feel embarrassed having to do it. And I just wonder if there's some systemic, or just an attitude generally. It could be hundreds of years of the ways of viewing that arts, people in the arts, don't really need to get paid because, we love it so much. We don't have bills.
I think the proliferation of artist entrepreneur just also reminds people that, yeah, you're creative, but you do have rent to pay. Steve Zarai is here. Steve Zarai is a good friend of mine. He's a musician and a manager, and he taught me, I think, 10 years ago, how fun it is to invoice people. This is what he does on Saturday nights. And it is, because it reaffirms your value in your sending your invoice for service. And I think I said in my speech too about clear and consistent messaging about payment. And I think off the top to try to approach, I wish I could do this more, but off the top, trying to be very clear about compensation.
Charge GST.
Hi, so I work in a different discipline, and you and I have known each other for a little while, but I work in Lindy Hop, or swing dance, which doesn't really have a professional practice in Canada, but does in Europe. And so I am a person who is a professional with 15 years dance experience, whereby people go, oh, but could you teach me a step? And I've actually asked people, I think actually to your comment, I say, sure, you're an accountant, right? Would you help me with my personal tax return this year? I'd happily give you 2 lessons at the rate of 70 pounds an hour if you would help me with my personal tax return as a sole trader. And as soon as I asked that, they were like, oh, well, really, I'm very busy. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, I'll go elsewhere. But my comment is that, is more so to your point, that it's the entire creative class, I think, that is wrestling with these questions of how do we define our value, how do we own our space, and how do we, I think, as leaders in our disciplines, create space for others to feel like they can stand up. Because I think at the moment, there's a lot of information that comes particularly to female artists, regardless of, and I find this in the dance world, where they'll always go to my male partner to ask about my rates, they'll ask about my availability, they'll ask about my dietary restrictions, and I'm like, I'm not that scary, you can ask me. But it's not just, I think in the music industry, I think it's across the cultural class, and it's about how do we educate ourselves as artists, and how do we educate the next generation of artists as to what they should expect and how to own that. Invoicing is a really important skill, but where are we learning how to invoice? And the answer is nowhere. And that's something that, unfortunately, the arts councils are not offering us. We know how to report, we know how to make a budget, but we don't necessarily know the income generation behind it and the other things that we can do with our professional skills that could earn us systematic and consistent income that could provide ease and support to make work.
When's your speech?
No, but
awesome.
my question to you is, because I've been thinking a lot about this, is as trainers, as people who can offer that, where are those places where we can go and where we can offer that support? Because I'd like to offer that.
Well, I think the same sort of thing I said about the panels. If anyone's in a position to put together something like that, obviously try to make a panel that's representative of the future that we want, but also, be a role model. Now, I look at Rhiannon, who has made this, the Economic Club of Canada, a huge success, and that is so inspiring and so incredible, and that she has a team of 7 women across Canada who do this. That's incredible. And so be that to as many people as you can. Reach out to the young people who are coming in and show them. I do think that there has to be some more business training programs offered for small business entrepreneurial training, because taxes, I mean, there's a myriad of things we need to know, and that we're sort of thrust out into the middle of the ocean with, well, you're an artist, make it work. But I would have loved to have a bit more tax knowledge and write what I can write off, and my Corolla and certain things. So absolutely, did that answer your question at all?
Of course it did.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Miranda, thank you so much.
Well, it's now my pleasure to sort of flip roles, and where Miranda thanked me at my speech, I now have the honor of thanking her. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I do think that we were all witness to something very special here today. And look, I mean, we've known and worked with Miranda at Music Canada for quite some time. We're aware of what just a tremendous advocate she can be. But I think, this is a debut on a much, much larger stage. And I think we're going to hear a lot more from you, but also others. And I know Rhiannon shares that vision. I just want to draw just a couple of my own lessons from, because I think we all, this wasn't just a speech which identified problems. I mean, there were very concrete things that every single person in this room can do today to change this. And at the root of, I think, the problems, and I don't know that I've really seen it phrased this way, is the issue of accountability. The fact that flawed people created a world based on assumptions in which creators now live. And they're not accepting responsibility for it. It's always somebody else's fault. It's like the Google person who was saying, well, the people it's working out as long as you adapt. And that's that sort of red in tooth and claw, adapt or die. You have not adapted, therefore you are not a good robot. You are a bad robot. So I think that's the foundation of it is, and I think we need to start thinking about it, and it's government too. Government was complicit in this. They bought into this. They set up rules that these people live in. I live in it. We all live in it. Scott lives in it. And I think that the answer, and what I'm hearing from you, yes, government funding is important, but it's the issue, at the root of it is a viable marketplace. Like, people want a viable marketplace. Grants are great, but wouldn't it be great if people paid and that there was a viable market? And that viable marketplace relies on rules and regulations that need to be put into place. I think that if these subsidies that Miranda's talking about, this is simply shifting wealth away from very, very, very wealthy corporations. And if the answer, instead of making them do that, instead of making them accountable for the shop store window and everything that's going on, instead if we say to the taxpayer, well, you know what, we're going to fund more creators, then it's the taxpayer who's subsidizing them. And it's this vast networks of subsidies which we could ameliorate if we simply expected accountability from so many of the different players in this environment. And I just wanted to end with a quote from Tessa Lena. Tessa is an American artist who you can find at tessafightsrobots.com. And she recently wrote a blog about one of the latest new things for artists, which she calls begging. It's Patreon, it's crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. This is how you do it. And she calls it begging. And she says, which is fine, if you want to do it, you can do it. But she has a very, very good blog on this. But here's how she ended. The foundation on which we are building our business models is an abomination and an anomaly. It is an abomination that is not intrinsic to human nature. It is a recent invention and a tiny dot on the storyline of human history. It is a disease and should be viewed as such. Even if it takes 1,000 years for us to collectively and individually fix it, so be it. I'm not saying it is easy or pleasant, but our choices matter, its legacy, and it's real. And that, I felt, was fire, there was passion in that, and I heard that from you too, Miranda, and I can only say thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I know the rest of us, I think I speak for all of us, for taking the time and the effort to so passionately bring to the fore your own views on this. Thank you.